Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Joe Davidge, and I'm the Executive Director here at the Georgia Center for the Book. And on behalf of the Georgia Center for the Book, DeKalb County Public Library, and the DeKalb Library Foundation, welcome to another in our continuing series of virtual events. This evening, of course, we are featuring poetry, and I am so very happy that we have not one, not two, but three Poets Laureate for you this evening. Just a few things before we start our program in full. If you would like to ask a question after the formal presentations this evening, please feel free to do so by using the Q&A feature of Zoom. You will find the Q&A button at the top or the bottom of your screen, depending on your device. So just click on that and type in your questions, and we'll answer those in turn. Also, for those of you who are hearing impaired, we do have live transcription enabled for you this evening. You can, of course, resize the font in live transcription by locating the CC button at the top or bottom of your screen, and then resizing to suit your needs. We would also like to mention that the Kentucky Center for the Book and the Alabama Center for the Book have joined with us this evening to help promote and share this event with their patrons. We are all affiliates of the National Center for the Book and the Library of Congress, and it thrills me that we are able to work together on this particular program. I'd also like to recognize the University of Kentucky Press and Hub City Press for the books this evening as well. If you'd like to order copies of our poetry books, Karis Books is the independent bookstore that we've chosen this evening. You will find the order link in the chat, so feel free to click on that and order as many copies as you would like. Independent bookstores have done so much in this past few years, trying to get us the books that we need and the inspiration that we sometimes need during this pandemic. So wherever you are watching this program, either order from Karis Books or buy these books from your local independent bookstores, especially our Black-owned independent bookstores, because we truly want to make them part of our literary community and make our literary community as diverse as possible. Also, we have some great events coming up this fall, and if you've missed any of our events in the past, we do have a YouTube channel. You can find us by searching Georgia Center for the Book on YouTube, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. That way you will find out when we upload our most recent literary events. Right now, I would like to turn this over to Chelsea Rathburn, who is our Poet Laureate here in Georgia. Chelsea is, of course, the author of 3 full-length poetry collections, Still Life with Mother in Ninth, The Shifting Line, and A Raft of Grief. Rathburn's poems have appeared in Poetry, The Atlantic Monthly, The New Republic, The Southern Review, The New England Review, and Plowshares, among others. In 2009, she received a poetry fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts. And although she was born in Jacksonville and raised in Miami, her roots in Georgia go very, very deep, where her mother's family has lived since the 1830s. Chelsea moved to Decatur in 2001 after completing graduate school, and also lived in the North Georgia mountains, working at Young Harris College, where she directed the creative writing program. She is currently a professor at Mercer University in Macon, Georgia, and was appointed our Poet Laureate in March of 2019. So thank you all so much for joining us for this very, very exciting evening. And right now, I'd like to turn it over to Chelsea.
Thank you, Joe. It is such a pleasure to be here. Thanks to Joe and the Georgia Center for the Book. I am just really thrilled to welcome 2 illustrious state poets laureate to my home state. So I'm just going to briefly introduce our 2 poets, and then I'm going to get off the virtual stage, and I will be coming back later to help moderate the Q&A. So as Joe Davidge mentioned, if you have questions along the way for our poets, please use that Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen, and I will gather those questions and present them, and we'll have a conversation. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to begin. We're going to order things alphabetically. So we are going to begin with Ashley M. Jones, who is Poet Laureate of the state of Alabama. Ashley's poems have appeared in numerous journals, including Poetry Magazine, where she also recently served as a guest editor, the Academy of American Poets Poem and Day Series, Oxford American, and the Harvard Journal of African American Public Policy, to name just a few. I was really working hard to condense these bios because both of our readers are so accomplished. Ashley Jones' debut poetry collection, Magic City Gospel, was published by Hub City Press in 2017, and it won the silver medal in poetry in the 2017 Independent Publishers Book Awards. Her second book, Dark Thing, won the 2018 Lena-Miles Wever Todd Prize from Pleiades Press. And her third collection, Reparations Now, it's a gorgeous book, is just out from Hub City Press. Jones is a recipient of a poetry fellowship from the Alabama State Council on the Arts and a 2020 Alabama Author Award from the Alabama Library Association. She currently lives in Birmingham, where she is founding director of the Magic City Poetry Festival, co-director of PEN Birmingham, and a faculty member in the creative writing department of the Alabama School of Fine Arts. Our second reader, Crystal Wilkinson, is Kentucky's Poet Laureate, and she is the author of the new poetry collection, Perfect Black, and also author of 3 works of fiction, The Birds of Opulence, Water Street, and Blackberries, Blackberries. Wilkinson is the recipient of a 2021 O. Henry Prize, a 2020 USA Artist Fellowship, and a 2016 Ernest J. Gaines Prize for Literary Excellence. Her short stories, poems, and essays have appeared in numerous journals and anthologies, including most recently the Kenyon Review, Story, Agni Literary Journal, Emergence, Oxford American, and Southern Cultures. Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghosts, a culinary memoir, is forthcoming from Clarkson Potter Penguin Random House in August 2023. And after reading a lot of poems with food in them this afternoon, looking through Perfect Black, I have to say I'm really excited for that culinary memoir. Wilkinson currently teaches at the University of Kentucky, where she is Associate Professor of English in the MFA and Creative Writing program. So please join me in first welcoming Ashley M. Jones, and then she'll be followed by Crystal Wilkinson. Thank you. Welcome, Ashley.
Thank you, Chelsea, and thank you, Joe and Georgia Center for the Book, as well as the Alabama Center for the Book, and even the Kentucky Center for the Book, all the centers for all the books. It's funny, as you were introducing us, Chelsea, I was worried that you would finish before the dorm announcement. I'm still at school right now, finished, so it was just in perfect timing. I'm so excited to be here with Crystal tonight. We had the opportunity to read together just a few weeks ago, and I'm so glad that we're back together and I can hear more of her work. I'm going to attempt to read 6 poems from Reparations Now during my set. And so let's just dig in. I'm going to start by welcoming my dad into the room. For those who do not know, I lost my father in April of this year, which has been impossible, truly. But recently, I feel like my dad has just been showing up everywhere. One of my nightly prayers is that I can stay connected to him, even though he's no longer here on earth, and he's just been popping up. So instead of him making his way on his own, I've decided I'm gonna just invite him on in and read this poem that was actually commissioned by the Southern Foodways Alliance. And it's about food and gardening and Blackness. Photosynthesis. When I was young, my father taught us how dirt made way for food, how to turn over soil so it would hold a seed, an infant bud, how the dark could nurse it until it broke its green arms out to reach the sun. In every backyard we've ever had, he made a little garden plot with room for heirloom tomatoes, corn, carrots, peppers, jalapeno, bell and poblano, okra, eggplant, lemons, collards, broccoli, pole beans, watermelon, squash, trees filled with fruit and nuts, Brussels sprouts, herbs, basil, mint, parsley, rosemary, onions, sweet potatoes, cucumber, cantaloupe, cabbage, oranges, Swiss chard and peaches, sunflowers tall and straight-backed as soldiers, lantana, amaryllis, echinacea, pansies and roses and bushes bubbling with hydrangeas. Every plant with its purpose. flowers to bring worms and wasps, how their work matters here. This is the work we have always known, pulling food and flowers from a pile of earth. The difference now, my father is not a slave, not a sharecropper. This land is his, and so is this garden, so is this work. The difference is that he owns this labor, the work of his own hands for his own belly, for his own children's bellies. We eat because he works. This is the legacy of his grandmother, my great granny, Ollie Mae Harris, and her untouchable flower garden. Just like her hats, her flower beds sprouted something special, plants and colors the neighbors could only dream of. He was young when he learned that this beauty is built on work. The cows and the factories in their stomachs, the fertilizer they spewed out, the stink that brought such fragrance. What you call waste, I call power. What you call work, I make beautiful again. In his garden, even problems become energy, beauty. My father has ended many work days in the backyard, worries of the firehouse dropping like grain. My father wrist deep in soil. I am convinced the earth speaks back to him as he feeds it. It is a conversational labor, gardening. The seeds tell him what they will be. The soil tells seeds how to grow. My father speaks sun and water into the earth. We hear him each harvest, his heartbeat sweet like fruit. So that's that poem. And feel free in the chat if you'd like to react, please do that if it is in your spirit to do so. I want to move on to another poem that features my parents. I really love my parents a lot. Nabi, is that Nabila Lovelace? Can't be Nabila Lovelace. Oh my goodness, that's my family right there. And also a really amazing poet. But this poem, as I said, features my parents as well. And it actually borrows a form from Mary Seabist, I believe is how you say her last name. I'm sorry to her if I'm mispronouncing her name. But it's in this, hopefully you can see this sort of starburst pattern. And I got that form from her book Incarnadine, which is a really wonderful book. And her poem is called How Not to Speak of God. And in this poem, there's different phrases that sort of attempt to describe God, but of course, God is God, so it's hard to describe them. And this poem that I wrote is also about God. One summer, a couple of years ago, everywhere I went, a tow truck was in front of me, not because I was being pulled by it, but because just it was randomly there. And so I started to wonder, like, what does this mean? Why are tow trucks in my path? Is there, some sort of message for me? Am I going to get into an accident? What is it, God? I asked. And I was not in any accidents that summer, but this poem did come to me because looking at these tow trucks and seeing that crossbar on the back and how it sort of is tilted in a Jesus-y kind of way, I started to think about, the ways that God has been available to me, and maybe more casually than we think. It doesn't have to be always in a church. Sometimes, maybe always, you can find God in all the places, in the plants, in the trees, in poetry, in a curl of hair, anything, and in my parents, for sure. So this is Hymn of Our Jesus and the Holy Tow Truck. Is it that easy, God, to be pulled, or as if a car, half crushed, maybe to follow on the back of a tow truck? And incidentally, Lord, is that you I see flexed on the crossbar of a rusty wrecker on its way to the east side of Birmingham, which is like Eden, growing holy fruit? My mother, the summer plot of peach, my father, the strong tomato, its unbending vine. Did you teach them to grow in this way, In the sweat of Alabama, strong as the dying crow, its blood-hardened wing straight as a crucifix, pointing always, easily, stubbornly, straight up, pious as a bone toward you. That's that one. So let's keep in the realm of my parents. As I've mentioned, I love my parents so much. They are the best parents anyone ever had, ever. And I just feel so blessed to have had them. And this poem is a sonnet, and it's also an ode. And basically how this came about, I like to eavesdrop quite a lot. I'm a writer. I think most of us enjoy eavesdropping and people watching and all of that. But I especially love listening to my parents talk to their families. As you may be able to tell, I don't really have a Southern accent, which now I regret, not seeking one out earlier. But my parents have it, and they also, have always had this way of using English in a way that swings. And what I mean by that is they are Black people, they are Black Southern people, so their version of English is much more rich and poetic, I would even say, than the Queen's English. So in this poem, I'm waking up in the morning and hearing my mom talk to her sister on the phone in Greensboro, Alabama, which is where my mom is from. So here we go. "Oh, Bod, my mother calls home." And is softer, sweeter than yes. Out of my mother's mouth, it's a song. How beautiful, this flavor of English, best served over the phone, best from mother, now miles and miles away from home. Greensboro and its clay, its quiet constellation of field flowers, the unrelenting glow of porch lamps, lemons filled with light. The sun is a dull bulb in comparison. Today, I wake to my mother's voice, her sister on the other side of the line. There's a comfort in knowing this language can stir the air until it feels like a mother's tongue, comfortable enough to drop some R's. All right, so we are making our way on through. We're gonna switch gears. The next piece that I wanna read is about men. Yeah, the question that comes to mind when I say men is why, honestly, just why. But this is a poem that I wrote out of, honestly, just frustration. I am someone who is seeking their life partner. So of course, there's a lot of near misses, we'll say it that way. And I just wanted to write this poem to all the men who made sure I knew where I stood. So this is for the men who made sure I knew they did not love me. First of all, ain't nobody want you anyway. Nobody asked to smile in your face and hug your neck and ignore the brown ring around your stank collar and cook you meals, real meals, with grease and a foot put in. Nobody asked to watch you eat with your whole fat tongue and each little piggy spit shined and food all in your mouth, jostling while you talk about nothing, about how much you love my cooking and not me. Nobody asked you for kisses so wet I had to towel down after, for kisses so stolen I had to call the police, for kisses so sweet I almost believed them. Nobody asked for too much tongue, for the trick of pleasure masquerading as love. Ain't nobody asked for songs, for your off-key whining, for your on-key whining, but still sour somehow, for your fingers on the piano, for your fingers on the piano while somebody else sings about you. Nobody asked for love songs you did not mean or even understand. Ain't nobody asked to read your poems, your term papers, your very long emails with typos. Nobody went to college twice to cross your T's, dot your I's. Nobody asked to be loved by you. I know I wasn't loved by you. You ain't gotta tell me. I know the shape of unlove. It looks like your mouth, slick with joy, while your eyes dead flat. And as the youth would say, that's on period, that poem. The youth, not me. I don't know that I can use the slang like the youth do. I'm going to wrap up my set with a poem, a poem that I read yesterday at a reading, but I want to read it again, so I'm going to. And this piece actually is about, or it's set at AWP, which is a very strange place for anyone who's ever been. It's like the Twilight Zone. Weird stuff always happens there. And this poem actually came out of my experience going on tour with my second book. For like a few months out of my tour, it seemed like everywhere I went, some weird racist thing happened to me. And the culmination was at this house party at AWP, and this woman made this very tasteless joke. And so, yeah, and the poem references an earring. This poem kind of descended from on high when I found this earring that had broken when this woman said this terrible thing to me. I find the earring that broke loose from my ear the night a white woman told me the world would always save her. I remember that earring made me feel so free, so full of beauty, the kind that you might notice. Beauty that could make my shoulders glow. I remember her face, alight with a devious curiosity in the porch light of the house party. That party in that city which slathered a film over its racism with clean streets and yard signs proclaiming inclusion. That city in that American state which legally excluded Black residents in 1844, which entered the Union big, proud, and white. Does it matter that this woman was not evil, did not send bombs to kill children in a far off country, did not buy or sell a single slave? Picking up the earring, unwearable until I find another hook on which to hang it from my ear, I remember again the words and their cool sting. I'm a white woman. People protect us. Does it matter what I said to invite these words? Does it matter that I did not invite these words? Does it matter that she thought this was a joke, a sign that she was on the right side, a way to pass a moment under the porch light? I've been thinking about intention lately, how I'm always asked to consider how good a person is, what they meant versus what they said. I think about the man who called me colored at a hotel in 2019. I think about the N-word out of a white person's mouth, about erasure. I wonder about the road to hell, which they say is paved in these same intentions, good. George Zimmerman intended to protect his sidewalk from Trayvon's body, invasively alive. George Washington intended to protect America from Britain's oppression, never mind those oppressed Black bodies. Yes, I am weaving a rope between George Zimmerman and George Washington. Yes, I am saying it. My country 'tis of thee, sweet land of white supremacy. When she said it, my face could barely twist into anything but fatigue. I am tired over and over again of being told I am not human enough to matter. The white poet rages against me on Facebook. Maybe he imagines my blood against his ivory tower. Maybe he imagines the many bricks my foremothers and fathers built, Lucille, Phyllis, Gwendolyn, Paul, Lawrence, Langston, Sonia, Maya, Nikki, tumbling at the flick of his well-educated thumb. Is even my degree a different color, relegated to the back of a bus, a book? The business of poetry so thick with privilege, so smothered in the rust of its old gates. How can you breathe among all that rot? On the news, the man they call president tells us to go back from where we came. I think of all the lost ones thrown over boats, the ones locked away in cages, the ones here, sitting as American as the day is long and still called wrong. The earring says, I once was lost when I find it, tells me it can be repaired. It is an earring of the struggle. It wants that ear it once called home. It wants to touch my brown skin and reflect it in its orbiting gold. I look for my pliers, my jewelry kit. The work is always the thing that makes us whole again. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Ashley. That was beautiful and sent me into a range of emotions. I feel like I need to take a breath before I start. But I also want to thank everyone, thank all the centers of the book for this event. It's great to be here with Ashley again. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Chelsea. And again, thank you, Ashley. I'm just gonna sort of dive in and I think I'm going to try to make some kind of narrative arc of the book in just a few poems. So I really won't explain them very much. I'll just begin and read through. Yes, you all keep giving Ashley love. First one is called Terrain. The map of me can't be all hills and mountains, even though I've been country all my life. The twang in my voice has moved downhill to the flatland a time or two. My taste buds have exiled themselves from fried green tomatoes and rhubarb for goat milk and pine nuts. Still, I return to old ground time and again, a homing blackbird destined to return. I am plain brown bag, oak and twig, mud pies and gut-wrenching gospel in the throats of old tobacco brown men. When my spine crooks even further toward my mother, I will continue to crave the bulbous tang of wild shallots, the familiar game of oxtails and kraut boiling in a cast iron pot. I toe dive in all the rivers, seeking the whole of me, scout virtual African terrain, sifting through ancestral memories, but still I'm called back home through hymns sung by stout Black women in large hats and flowered dresses. You have to risk the briar bush to reach the sweet dark fruit, and ain't no country woman all church and piney woods. There is pluck and cayenne pepper. There is juke joint gyrations in the young and barren girth of this belly and these supple hips. All roads lead me back across the waters of blood and breast milk, from ocean to river, to the lake, to the creek, to branch and stream, back to the sweet rain, to the cold water in the glass I drink when I thirst to know where I belong. Baptism. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Imagine a girl not yet troubled, dressed in a crisp white dress, black patent leather shoes, and new white tights, pressed hair smelling of royal crown, bangs curled under, glistening. He was the preacher, the Reverend William H. Mills Jr., long, good hair, slicked back, pearl-handled cane, pocket watch chain dangling from a double-breasted suit. We stand in water up to our knees. The congregation reads scripture, eyes peeking between hymnals and Sunday hats. The Bible is handed to the deacon. I baptize you in the name of the Son, the Father, and the Holy Ghost. See me submerged in cold creek water that seeps into my nostrils, tastes like danger in my mouth. I fight the hand of the preacher, come up gasping and crying. Bless her heart, she's feeling the spirit, Sister Usher says under a heavenly hat. Everybody claps and commences to sing of being washed in the blood of the Lamb, but I didn't feel devotion, felt wicked with my secrets, wasn't even sure what the Holy Ghost was. See me with my legs closed and my skirt tailed down. See me cover my knees. See me bless my food, and comfort was found in baptismal rewards, a bottle of orange knee-high, a sanctified fried chicken leg, corn pudding, and German chocolate cake. Let the church say amen. My full belly, the most sacred part. Like Ashley, I write a lot about family, and a lot of these poems have stories within them, since my primary artistic mode is fiction. And these next two are about my mother, and my mother suffered from mental illness nearly all of her life. Black Rapunzel. My mother's girlhood drifts beneath the bloody wound of shock treatments. Her memory, a dull knife in some country woman's kitchen. One time, when I was real little, all women from down home began their stories this way. Daddy had this old horse out in the barn, and he told us not to ride it while him and Mama were at the store. They rode that old horse all day, and then when it was my turn, that horse fell over dead. They all blamed me, and I was the one who got the beating, my mother said. My grandfather told me once that Mama was the prettiest one on the place, said she had great long hair, as if schizophrenia had erased her beauty. I was 7, a daughter already plagued by the shame of her mother's sickness. In the calyx of my imagination, Mama became our Black Rapunzel, letting down her hair, some black and shiny miracle sent to save us all. Asking about my mother. In the small kitchen, the hog's head weaves the gamey scent of death throughout the house. My grandmother scrapes black hair from the hog's pink head with the sharp blade of her butcher knife. I ask her about my mother. I always ask her about my mother. I play paper dolls under a formica table with pearls around my neck and pink lipstick from my mother's treasure chest. My grandmother places the head into the tub, and I watch her hands, wait for her to tell me where my mother's gone. My grandmother fills the tub with water. I hate that she always reminds me of all she's done for love. Remember, remember, hair, face, knife. She lifts the heavy tub and situates the hog up on the stove, covering all the burners, and turns on all the eyes. I have a suite of persona poems in the middle of this first section that are in the voice of my grandfather. And my grandfather was a water witch. And I'll just share the last one of this suite. It's called The Water Witch on Reading. Oh, I cipher pretty good, and can't no white man cheat me on my crops or on my change at the feed store. I'm known around these parts for being able to remove a wart with a bean. I'm the one they come to when they want their well witched, and now everybody asks me how many snows we're gonna have come winter, or when they need to pull a baby from a mama's teat. Man from way off stopped here once for me to teach him how to make sorghum. Been learning all my life. I can read a map, can read a man's eyes and see if he's truthful. I can level a girder by sight. I can read the tremble in a cow's gut, a man's footprints in the mud. I can read a man's heart to see if he's right with the Lord, though it ain't my place to say. I can read time by my own shadow. I can read the corners of Christine's mouth and tell if she's mad at me. Only thing I can't read is words. One more about my grandfather. A lot of country men, I think, find beauty in the fields, and I don't remember my grandfather ever calling me or my mother or my grandmother beautiful. I know he thought we were, but mostly when he talked of beauty, he was talking about his crops. So this is a poem that's an ode. Oh, tobacco. You are the warm burnt sienna of my grandfather's skin, soft like ripe leather. I cannot see you any other way but as a farmer's finest crop. You are a Kentucky tiller's livelihood. You were school clothes in August, the turkey at Thanksgiving, Christmas with all the trimmings. I close my eyes, see you tall, stately green, lined up in rows, see sweat seeping through Granddaddy's shirt as he fathered you first. You were protected by him, sometimes even more than any other thing that rooted in our earth. Just like family, you were coddled, cuddled, coaxed into making him proud. Spread out for miles, you were the only pretty thing he knew. When I think of you at the edge of winter, I see you brown, wrinkled, just like Granddaddy's skin. A 10-year-old me plays in the shadows of the stripping room. The wood stove burns, calloused hands twist through the length of your leaves. Granddaddy smiles, nods at me when he thinks I'm not looking. You are pretty and braided, lined up in rows like a room full of brown girls with skirts hooped out for dancing. And I'll switch it up a little bit. Part of this book is about sort of a political awareness and also about my parents, clearly. And I didn't read my father until I was 13. I was 13 years old when I met my father. So this is a poem about my father. My father was a city. My father was a place marked with drawn lines, Black people over here, white people over there, small shotgun houses behind fences, mamas on porches with the bright haze of television pouring into the night, someone always left for dead in his alley. When I looked at my father, I thought of that brother on 3rd Street, the sharp crack of his skull, the 2x4 swinging the last quivers of his life. Sometimes my father was wasteful. But sometimes my father was a celebration, a child's smiling face, gold tooth twinkling, enough kindness to give us respite on nights like this. Just a few more. This was probably, this is a poem about my first brush with politics, even though I wasn't studying no politics, which you'll hear in this. This is not a political poem. I'm just remembering how I was eating cheese, eggs, and toast when Richard Nixon resigned, how cousins gathered around the TV cross-legged on the floor, how I wasn't studying no president, how I was studying my cousin's friend Mark. Tall Mark with the afro as big as the globe back home on Miss Ridney's desk. This is not a political poem because I was 12 and wearing lip gloss and hot pants, flowers in my hair, so many miles from my grandmother's reach that summer. This is not a political poem, but today I'm thinking about how we got here. I'm thinking about the woman I've become. This is not a political poem, but today I am thinking about guns and rape culture and men who can't think beyond the power of their pricks. This is not a political poem, but I am thinking about the swagger in the walk of a 15-year-old boy in Ohio and wondering what kind of man he became. I wonder if he had any children. I wonder if they are alive. And I'll read just two more and call it the last set. Black body. My black body is a boulder, a stop sign. Sometimes I think my black body is graceful, a song of freedom. Sometimes I think it is something that every eye casts away. I must concentrate if I want to fit into small spaces, slip into the eye of America's needle. Twice last week, I went without eating, filling up on self-loathing and discontent, only to give in to a slice of pound cake and a bowl of ice cream. To stay awake, I drink a glass of tea and watch the flawed reality of television housewives. Before bed, I stretch myself out along the couch and place my feet in my husband's lap. I can't stop thinking about the little girl in the back of Philando Castile's car. Mommy, please stop screaming so they won't shoot at you. At 4 years old, she saw her mother's unarmed boyfriend shot, bleeding, dead on the front seat. I can keep you safe, she tells her mother. My body embarrasses the famous white woman at the writing conference as if my fat will rub off on her if she gets too close. When I'm sick, I want buttered sweet rice and a tender hand moving in circles on my back. Yesterday, I ate meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans at the Cracker Barrel in Tennessee. The white waitress called me baby doll. Once, I remember feeling the quickening of babies in my womb, 4 tiny hands pressing against my navel, 4 tiny feet pressing against my ribs. And I want to end with a love poem for my partner, my husband, Ron. It's called Witness. I'm convinced that if you could have seen my grandmother standing in the doorway waiting for him to come home from the fields, if you'd smelled that spectacular evening thick with sweat and felt the pulsing of the stars, if you'd borne witness to the animals' moans echoing in the holler that night, if you just could have seen the hair rise up on Granddaddy's arm like that, like offerings to God when his elbow touched hers, if you could have seen her longing dissipate just a little as he came through the door smelling like a day's work, you should have seen them close enough to breathe the same air while not even touching. He smiled at her without smiling. If you could have seen them watching me watch them, then you'd know how much I love you. If you could have heard her say, "You want some supper? We got pie." Thank you.
Wow. Those were 2 just unbelievable readings. Amazing. So incredible. The poem, I'm tearing up right now. I'm a crier, but I'm just, Crystal, that was gorgeous. I love the poem when I read it on the page, and then to hear you read it is just incredibly moving. Ashley and Crystal, just such beautiful poems and such powerful readings from both of you. So we are entering the Q&A, the conversation section of the evening. So I would like to invite, Ashley's back with us. Crystal, everybody can both unmute. I know if you wanted to have any conversation amongst yourselves, ask a question to one another. I know you've read together before, but we do have a few questions from the audience as well. And again, if you're in the audience, please, best place to go rather than the chat at this point is the Q&A. And I'll have a few questions to fire off at our poets once we're ready. But gosh, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Crystal, I'm still in that last line. I wonder if his children are still alive. I'm messing up your line, but I'm still there. Like, wow. And I also just want to say, it feels so good to read with another Southern Black woman. Like, I don't even know how to put it into words, to know that the person who's reading with you, like, understands, like we're speaking the same language.
Yeah, when you read that poem, and of course I've read your book now, but when you read the poem about your father, I mean, so many of the poems I was about to cry, but that one especially, like him being in the dirt and that connection to the land and the way that Black people are connected to the land that we never really talk about anymore. There's not that many of us with a rural sensibility. So I feel like we're sisters of experience, and we're sisters of the word. And I hope as soon as it's over, we can read together in person and hug. Like that's what all I want to do is like walk across the stage and give you a hug right now.
Oh. Well, I feel it. I received that hug, even though it is virtual right now. And I'm sure that once we're able to move more freely, we will be in a room together, hopefully eating some of those foods that you mentioned in your poems.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a question from the audience that I think speaks to some of the comments you just made. And this comes from Angela Jackson Brown.
Oh,
and she
Angela Jackson Brown. I'm going to let you ask the question, Chelsea, but Angela Jackson Brown is an amazing writer. If you do not have her newest book, When Stars Rain Down, you need to fix your life and purchase that book and read it today. Sorry, I'm so sorry, Chelsea.
There's a commercial.
This is amazing. All right, so Angela writes, and forgive me, I'm nearly completely blind without these glasses, but she writes, when I was a young girl growing up in rural Alabama, I had no clue that Black people wrote poetry, save Langston Hughes. Somehow I cobbled together a voice over time, but it was difficult and torturous at times. When did you discover Black poets, writers, and in what ways did that discovery affect the growth and development of your unique voices?
Wow.
Well, for me,
for both of you, of course.
I did not have any Black voices. I was a writer already. I knew that that's what I wanted to be, but I didn't see a way to become a writer. You know, I read a lot. My grandmother read to me. I started writing, bad rhyming poems and just writing about anything that came to mind to write about. But I didn't see any reflection of myself until after I went to college. I'm a little bit older than Ashley, but so that was my experience, and it was a horrible experience. And that's one reason why I'm excited to be the first Black woman poet laureate of Kentucky, because I hope that this experience will make other little Black girls' spines straighter and they can walk into their life with words with some confidence, knowing that they can do this and not have to take so long, which was my path.
Yeah, this is a great question, first of all, Angela Jackson Brown, with the writerly question. How do I want to start? So I think the hardest thing that I've encountered in my career and in my life has been feeling validated in my own voice for reasons that Crystal mentioned as well, just not really seeing the way. And I discovered Black poets as early as 7 years old, actually. I read Eloise Greenfield's Honey, I Love, and recited in front of my class, Harriet Tubman didn't take no stuff, wasn't scared of nothing neither, didn't come in this world to be no slave and wasn't gonna stay one either. And there's more to that poem that I don't remember because I was 7, but that's how it starts. And I remember feeling, finally like, wow, I'm Black. I felt so alive with that language and the power that I just hadn't really felt before, because I was a little weird Black girl, a bookish, Black girl who was in the gifted class, self-contained gifted class with students who were not necessarily Black. There was maybe like 2 of us in there. And I'm a proper speaking girl. And I always was like, why can't I just sound Southern? My goodness, I just want to sound like everybody else. But here I am with all my hard R's. And when I recited this poem, I just felt so affirmed. And so I started to write bad rhyming poems as well in my little spy notebook that I carried around because I loved Harriet the Spy as well. So I was like spying on my parents and whatever. Anyway, I started writing these poems, and it really was my formal education in writing. Not just in high school, and this is of course no shade to my teachers at all. This is really shade to the white supremacist, colonial education system that made them teach what they taught. But it was really my education that made me unlearn excitement about my own race. And, it forced me also to do a lot of self-study. So in college was when I really started to seek out Black poets, That's when I fell in love with Rita Dove, Lucille Clifton, my patron saint. And it was that experience that helped me to feel possible, or at least to help fuel the dreams that I'd already dreamed as a young girl. So for me as well, being the first person of color poet laureate of my state, I really, really hope, and I already was hoping this before I got this position, but I really hope that me being visible is enough for someone to have an easier time, for them to go to a workshop and not feel like their work is invalid because everybody's asking, what does this mean? How come you can't say it like this? And we don't care about this. Or people, you know, not understanding that Black history is for them to learn as well, you know. So hopefully this is doing something, you know, for anyone, not just the youth, honestly, because a lot of us are adults and are trying to find our way as well.
Terrific, terrific answers. I was struck by, just to shift gears a little bit, both of you referenced starting out writing bad rhyming poems. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, I was struck, Ashley, particularly, you know, in your book, you've got some of these sonnets, some of them are very experimental, you know, with shorter lines, and sometimes I feel like the poem's sort of been exploded. You read for us the poem in the starburst pattern, but I was also struck that in both of your books, you know, you both also work in prose lines. Of course, I think some of us and some of our audience members, you know, don't have your books yet, and so they can't imagine, you know, but a lot of these poems are stretching across the page rather than having the traditional short line lengths. And I was wondering if you just, if
one for people who want to see it. That's
exactly the last, right? I think the last poem you read was a dense block of text. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to this question of form, like what compels you, you know, what compels you to write a more traditional poem versus versus a sonnet? And also, Crystal, feel free to, something else I was curious about. I know that you also are a successful fiction writer. You know, what compels you to the poem versus, say, writing a story?
Well, I feel like that I have been saving my poems for a long time, and many of the poems in this book have been around for a long time. I have such a reverence for poetry and poets that I had saved that voice for a long time without letting it out in the world much. You know, every so often I might get a poem published, but certainly not my own volume. But there was something freeing about writing my last book, which was a novel, The Birds of Opulence. And it was the first time I ever let all of my writing selves be housed in the same body. So my poet self and my fiction self, my nonfiction self, suddenly announced themselves to be one. And so I allowed the lyricism to come through when I was writing that novel. I allowed there to be, you know, sort of a thin thread of hidden autobiography in there. I just allowed them all to live in one body. So I think that for me, writing a book sort of leads to the next book. And so I think writing might sound strange, but I think writing the novel, The Birds of Opulence, sort of gave me permission to put the poems in the world. And some of the pieces are lyric essays in this book, what I would call them, instead of calling them poems. Some of them are lyrics proper, I think. And those pieces, poems, and other things in this book paved the way for the next book that's coming, which is the food memoir. So I think for me, it has to do with also embracing my voice, because I think that one of the reasons why I was hesitant about writing poetry was because all the poets that I love, you know, I'm looking at my shelf here, all the poets on the shelf that I love write differently than I do, which is probably a good thing, but I didn't see it as that in the beginning. I have such a love for poets and what they do.
Well, for me, I'm really still thinking about what Crystal said about her fiction self, her nonfiction self, and her poet self. So far, I just have the two selves, poet, and I'm just starting the nonfiction self. I don't know if fiction self has been born yet, honestly. I would leave that to those who can do it well. But as far as form, for me, I actually, growing up, I hated form. Hated it, hated it, hated it. I always say I used to evangelize against form, because whenever somebody, and I was at an art school, so like I already thought I was, whatever. But, I would always say, oh, form is just so, archaic. There's no reason for it, blah, blah, blah. And that really had to do with how it was being taught to me, in English classes. And again, this is not shade to any teachers. It's just the way that we approach knowledge in our country is usually not actually helpful for learning. We're not actually trying to foster a real engagement with things. So it wasn't until I got to graduate school, actually, and I had to take a poetics class and with Campbell McGrath, who teaches at FIU. And something about the way that he taught, really, I think it was that he included contemporary voices. That's what made me realize, oh, wait a minute. This is what form is for. We're supposed to use it like clothing. Somebody asked me a question a few weeks ago about how does my fashion relate to my poetry? And I think it's really, I'm trying to dress the poem in its appropriate outfit, just like I try to dress myself. Some poems need, like the one that I read with the Starburst, it needed to be in that form because it's about God, so it can't end and it can't begin. It's gotta just be like this, thus the form. The sonnets, if I want something to have a guaranteed surprise at the end, got to make it a sonnet. If I know that I'm going to be able to, go on too long with something, let me write a haiku so I can rein myself in. So for me, it's just, figuring out, listening to the poem. A lot of my process has to do with listening to what I call the spirit, whatever brings the work to me, but also listening to the poem, because the poem can tell you, this is what I need to be. Stop fighting me. Let me be a sonnet, or let me be a prose block, or, let me be a picture on the page. So that's kind of how I see it.
Form as an appropriate outfit to dress a poem in is wonderful. We have just a little bit more time. We do have a number of questions coming in here. Earlier, I had some questions about inspiration, sort of knowing how do you, have the authority to begin writing. I think those are great, but I also feel like we've maybe talked around those a little bit. So let me see, we have a couple of new questions. Let's see. Tanya asks for both poets, when you write of the earth, it feels as if it not only conjures the familiar, but also the ancestors who told before. What wisdom have you heard whispered on the winds that repeats itself in your writing?
One of my themes is clearly this idea of the kitchen ghost, which is my immediate mothers, my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and also the mothers that came before. And so when I'm writing about food, particularly, it's all ancestral, and it's particularly my matriarchal lineage that I'm leaning toward. And so I think they have actually been sort of guides, my spirit guides. Like, I never thought I would write a complete book about food, although I write about food all the time and have tried to go back to gardening and some of the things that I've experienced in my family. But I think that's been a good one. And, how nature has the capacity to heal for Black people, particularly Black women, has been a big message that has come through the ancestors, I think, and seeped deeply into my work.
Yeah, what has been whispered in the wind? I mean, right now, what's being whispered is about rest. I am not good at resting at all. I've never been good at resting. I inherited that from my father, who was a workaholic. And I'm trying to unlearn that, but I feel like, especially now in this time in my life when there's so much happening to me, I'm hearing over and over again from people, and of course they're getting it from the beyond, you know, just to value rest. And I think maybe all of us need to value that, especially in a society that is capitalist, that is patriarchal, that is colonial, XYZ. You know, rest is definitely not valuable because we have to work, and our value is directly tied to how much we have worked. But that's not sustainable, and that's not what God wants for us anyway. You know, to just be tired all the time. So that's what's being whispered to me, I think. But also joy is being whispered to me. I think we can forget joy. I definitely have been guilty of forgetting joy for various reasons, sometimes because of work. That's why work is sometimes evil, because it makes you forget joy. But in this time in my life, again, even though there's so much good, I am still grieving the very fresh death of my father. And I feel like he's really leading me to joy as well. You know, whenever I think of him, usually there's a funny story attached to it. He was a very funny man. And I feel like he wants me to be joyful, to think of all the things that he did for us, all the sacrifices that he made, and understand that I am to enjoy, you know, my life. I don't have to spend it, you know, in great sadness and I don't know, just in darkness. So that's what's being whispered. Hopefully that will touch somebody out there who needs it.
Thank you. Thank you. There's another question. Someone marveled at how moving both of your poems are. They said, you know, it takes a lot of mastery. Your poems made me cry. And, you know, it takes a lot of mastery and heart to write anything that provokes emotion in a reader. Can you share your secret? I assume your personal experience is a part of it, but how do you make a reader feel this strongly and even cry? Is it the time of day that you write? If you have a routine? But she says, how can I write? I think it's a she. Kasima. It's like, how can I make a reader feel this strongly when I write too? And I'll also add in here, we have another question from a college student saying, you know, I'm stuck finding inspiration. You know, where do you share your secrets, master poets? Tell us.
Well, I think one of the secrets is to write without fear. You know, I think it was Robert Owen Butler who said, go to the white hot center of what you're writing about without flinching. And I think that often we flinch because we fear that we don't have the right language. We fear that the piece won't be smart enough, that it won't be beautiful enough. But I think if you're writing from that hot center, you can do the outpouring stage, and there's always craft to come back to. And to clean it up with craft, but to get it out, you know, to write close to the bone and get the essence of the piece out first.
I shouldn't have let Crystal go first, because what can I say in addition to that? Yeah, I was going to say that my secret, which is not a secret, I don't know that I believe in keeping things secret, because that used to get on my nerves so badly growing up as a writer. Whenever like a writer would visit our school or anywhere, and you say like, how do you get published? How do you do this? And they're like, oh, it's a process. Like no specifics at all. So what I would say to that question is very similar to what Crystal has said so eloquently, but just to be authentic to the moment and to yourself. Because what you're experiencing, you're probably experiencing it because we felt that way too. And we are simply recording it on the page without, you know, being so overly concerned with, as Crystal said, is it going to be smart enough? Are people going to understand it? You know, who's going to publish this? The goal has to be to simply put the thing down on the page first, and everything else will follow, I promise. I have been sticking true to my guns. I hate that phrase. Let me say it again. I've been sticking true to myself, you know, throughout my career, even when I was a young person and like wasn't really super sure that my voice was good enough. It really goes back to my parents, who told me from a very early age, like, you're enough, you can do this. And I took that with me, you know, throughout my life. And now I understand that because I have stuck with that, that's why people can connect, I think, with my work. So I'm not trying to be anyone but me. These poems could not have been written by anybody but me. I'm not trying to, you know, jump through the hoops or impress. I'm just trying to tell you my story. So that's what I would say. And as far as inspiration, bless you, Crystal, it can be from anywhere. I am inspired by literally everything. If anybody tells you you can't write about non-literary stuff, that person is wrong and the devil is on them. Get away from them. You know, you can write about anything at all, whatever moves you. And sometimes if you're feeling like you don't have inspiration, that could be something telling you to rest away from the writing. Maybe you need to do something outside of writing right now. And that's okay too. You don't have to constantly write. You know, if you have writer's block, that's usually for a reason. You know, you need to work through that process, step away from the page, and just trust yourself. The work will come back to you when it's time.
Yeah, and be aware, because while you're walking around the neighborhood, eating, like, be fully in the moment and be aware, because the poem is there waiting for you to, the poem or the story or the essay is there waiting for you to grab it. And so you just have to be keenly aware and be observant as you're walking around in the world.
So I think one last question. One of our listeners asked, do you have any reading recommendations? What are you reading right now?
I'm reading a book that is not in the world yet. That's a book by Destiny Birdsong that I'm reading. She's a poet and is now about to be a novelist. She has a book called Nobody's Magic that you won't get to see until February, but get ready for it because it's beautifully written.
And of course, in addition to Angela Jackson Brown's book, which we mentioned before, and we're mentioning again at the end of the program, for those who did not order at the beginning of the program, When Stars Rain Down is out everywhere now. I recently read that, and I'm so glad you said that, Crystal, because I always forget to mention books that I'm blurbing. Ooh, do y'all hear that? It's storming outside. But I just read Michelle Dominique Burke's book, No Crying in the Garden, which is coming out pretty soon, I think, which is a beautiful book of poetry. Look out for that. That's what I've been reading. And student drafts, because grades were due today. So, yeah.
I'm behind on that. I'm so behind on my grading. Speaking of what we're reading in books, please, if you haven't already, please pick up copies of Perfect Black and Reparations Now. These are just absolutely gorgeous books. And I just want to say thank you again. I'm not sure if Joe Davich is going to join us again to say goodnight. I think he is. But I just want to thank you both. Welcome to Georgia. I hope that we can have you back for another event like this in person sometime. And this has just been such an absolute pleasure hearing your words and spending time with your books as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Chelsea. And we want you to read next.
Yes, please read next time.
Well, thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Crystal. And of course, thank you, Chelsea, for your wonderful job moderating this evening. I can't begin to tell you what a pleasure it was getting to sit back and listening to you all read from your work. And yes, Chelsea has also been busy. She has been reading and writing a special poem for one of our libraries, our Stone Mountain Library, that just reopened. And it is about returning to her childhood library, and it is absolutely phenomenal. I hope she continues to read it over and over again. But once again, I can't begin to tell you how much of the pleasure this was, hearing your words, hoping that we all stand a little bit straighter, and that for the next generation of poets truly stand on all of your shoulders. Such amazing, powerful women representing the poetry community just truly heartens me. So I'd like to thank the Kentucky Center for the Book and the Alabama Center for the Book for joining us. I encourage all of you to find your centers for the book, to look up and find out about your state Poets Laureate, and learn more about state Poets Laureate programs. Again, the order link for Kara's books has been put in the chat, and we encourage you to order from bookstores. And for the second night in a row, I get to say that women's voices matter, Black voices matter, and Black lives matter. Thank you all so very much for coming. Have a wonderful evening, and we will see you again very, very soon.